Right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for the last class in my dissertation series. Today I'm gonna just be talking about Syria, my biggest chapter, the Syrian Civil War case study. And I've been lecturing a lot throughout the series, so today I wanted to give people a chance to read some primary documents and interpret them themselves. I'm going to start real quick, and then I'm going to give a little brief reading, and then with some discussion questions, and later on I'll have a trailer that I'll show as well that people can ask some questions about. First, get into this. So I want to just start off by talking a little bit about Syria itself. Syria is a very diverse country in terms of ethnicities and linguistics and religions that exist in the country. The majority of Syria is Sunni Arab, which you see in the yellowish orange there. This kind of big arc going across Syria, big crescent. That's the Sunni Arab population, which makes up about 70% of the population. There's also 10% of the population are Christians, mostly of Arab descent. They're mostly centered in the cities, like Aleppo and Damascus. You also have a Kurdish population, which makes up another 10% or so of the population, which is majority Sunni, but is a different ethnicity, and they're based in the north, in these pink parts above Aleppo. There's Aleppo right there. 10% of the population is also Alawite, and they are mostly based in this coastal area right here, around what's called Tartus and Latakia, this lighter green area. And these darker areas are Druze populations, which tend to be more rural. Alawites are a kind of Shia Islam, but they're also kind of their own thing as well, but they're most closely related to Shia Islam. Whereas Druze and Yazidis, I believe, are a little more esoteric, much smaller populations, and their histories go back further, even to like pre-Islamic times. So just wanted to give that little preface before I give you this little reading. What I wanted to give you to read is this report on Syria, what's going on in the Civil War in August of 2012, right around the time that the US starts supporting the opposition, the rebel opposition in Syria, or at least they start openly supporting it. They start announcing that they're supporting the opposition. This is a report, internal, originally secret report by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the intelligence agency for the Department of Defense or the Pentagon. So this is mostly redacted, you'll notice. Kind of weird, you can't read it. I just want to take a few minutes to read that and think about these questions. How does this report describe the war in Syria? What are some of the factions involved that they mention, internal or external to Syria? Why are they involved in the fight? What are their interests? What sides are they on? What goals do they have? And what concerns does the DIA seem to have about this war?
But the one that is materialist, probably the need to tell illustrated.
Yeah, imperial. Does anyone need any extra time? So what do you think? What did you get out of it? How does this report describe the war?
Primarily the conflict.
Yeah, it says right up at the top, on the third page, after all these redacted portions, it says, the general situation, A, internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction, as in sectarian meaning divided based on the religious sects that are involved. So Shia versus Sunni specifically.
Rapid very sort of especially Al Qaeda as specifically to this solidarity expansion.
Yeah, that's good. The Al Qaeda, one of the famous things that really sets Al Qaeda apart from most other really conservative religious organizations in the Muslim world is that Al Qaeda has pretty consistently been open and proud about their sectarianism and their anti-Shiaism, where, as in, they commit terrorist attacks against Shia populations, Shia religious sites, Shia mosques, and they are openly proud of that. They use it. They use it as a recruitment tool. So Al Qaeda has a long history of that, of targeting Shia populations, especially in Iraq. Yeah, anything else?
It was.
What?
So I mean, I noticed other things, but
Yeah, what'd you notice?
the worst thing I noticed was Russia, China never in support the regime. First thing I circled.
Yeah, right.
To me, immediately speaks to why the U.S. is interested.
Yeah. So Syria is Russia's oldest ally and best ally in the Middle East. It has been that way since shortly after World War II, when Syria gained its independence. It was pretty quickly became friendly toward the Soviet Union, and it became an ally of the Soviet Union by the 1980s, and that alliance actually outlived the Soviet Union, and it continued to be friendly with Russia after the Soviet Union was gone. So yeah, on same page, under general situation, point C says the West, Gulf countries, and Turkey support the opposition, that is the rebels in Syria. And by Gulf countries, they mean the Persian Gulf. So that is Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and UAE. And then it says, well, Russia, China, and Iran support the regime, which is, yeah, I mean, China less so, definitely. Iran much more so early on in the fight, and Russia becomes a lot more involved later on in the war. And who are the insurgents or the opposition that the West Gulf countries and Turkey are supporting? Yeah, they're the Sunni rebels, and it says on point B there, it says the Salafist Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. Those are all Salafists, Muslim Brotherhood, and Al Qaeda in Iraq. Those are all Sunni Arab sectarian organizations. They are all pretty anti-Shia. They view them as heretics, basically, not real Muslims. So those are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria, and the West, Gulf countries, and Turkey are in support of them in this conflict. Salafists is a broader umbrella term that covers both the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda in Iraq. So Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood are organizations, whereas Salafi or Salafism or Salafist ideology is an ideology that they subscribe to. You can think of it, Salafism, as kind of like Puritanism. If you learned anything about the Puritans in early American history, they were people who argue that what truly faithful people need to do is they need to go back to the original text of the book, the holy book, and interpret it literally, interpret what the text says in a literal sense, and to reject the interpretations that the religious community, or what they call the ulema, have interpreted about the holy text over the past 1,000+ years of the history of Islam. So in Islam, kind of similar to the Catholic Church, at least in Sunni Islam, you have a religious institution that interprets the holy book, and they interpret it based on whatever their qualifications are. And so and these interpretations evolve over time. So kind of similar to the Puritans, who wanted to purify the church. They wanted to get rid of all the Catholic stuff, get rid of all what they saw as pagan. Because the Catholics, when they created the Catholic Church, they integrated a lot of pagan beliefs into Christianity. So the Puritans wanted to get rid of that. They didn't celebrate Christmas. They viewed it as a pagan holiday. They weren't into stained glass. They viewed that as a pagan thing. Saints, the idea of there being saints that are canonized by the Catholic Church, that was viewed as a pagan thing. So these people want to go back to an earlier, more pure time and to interpret the text of the Quran literally. That's kind of what it means to be a Salafist. Anything else about like factions that are involved, or the goals that those factions have? Which side they're on? Yeah. It seems like states I think like she be press, but it seems like these speakers, yeah, but yeah. Here I can actually take a minute to show another map of Middle East. Just get out. Period. Okay, so this is a map of the Middle East. And to talk about the Sunni Shia divide, most Muslims are Sunni, the vast majority of them are, but there are large pockets of Shia populations in the Middle East area. And America's geopolitical adversaries that we fight in the Muslim world, especially since the Iraq War, have been largely Shia. So Iran is the largest Shia population, largest Shia majority country in the region. Iraq is also about 50% Shia. I think they're a slight majority in the country. Syria is not majority Shia, but the government that's in charge is Alawite. Well, the Assad family is Alawite, and a lot of the key people in government are Alawite. So the Alawites are overrepresented in government, and they are much more supportive of the government than other populations are in the country. But you can say, maybe there's a Shia government in charge of Syria, although they try to stress their non-sectarianism. So Syrian government, an adversary of the United States. Iran, an adversary of the United States. Also in Lebanon, Hezbollah is the major representative of the Shia population in Lebanon, which is another significant minority in the country. And obviously, if you know anything about Hezbollah, you know that's another big boogeyman that the US has in the Middle East. But that is another Shia group. Also in Yemen, where the Houthis are, in northern Yemen, where the majority of the population is, that is also a Shia movement or a Shia government, a Shia militia. So all of those are the United States' main adversaries, right? The Houthis in Yemen, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iranian government, the Syrian government. Those are all Shia powers. And the reason why the US is so anti-Shia and pro-Sunni is complicated, and I can't give the best answer to that, but the thing I can say is that the US has a long-standing alliance with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has an ideology, the ruling class in Saudi Arabia, the Saud family, the royal family of Saud. They are Sunni, and they are also militantly anti-Shia, and they themselves promote a Salafi ideology. It's popularly called Wahhabism. There was a guy named Wahhab, and a lot of us call it Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia that they push as an official ideology. I believe they tend to call themselves Salafi. Calling someone a Wahhabist or a Wahhabi is usually seen as an insult. Their preferred term, I believe, is Salafi, which I believe means the ancestors, or the way of the ancestors. So they have an alliance with Saudi Arabia, which is traditionally very anti-Shia, and especially since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, you had this militant Shia religious ideology that came to force in Iran, and it became aligned against the United States. So you have this confluence of both America being very closely in bed with the Saudis, and then this new enemy that appears in the global theater in 1979, which is the Iranian regime, which is a theocratic, religiously oriented Shia regime, which Saudi Arabia is very worried. Saudi Arabia is very anti-Iranian more than anything else, because Iran could very easily destroy the Saudi Arabian government. Saudi Arabia has a lot of money, and they have a lot of weapons, but they don't have a very large or effective army. And Iran has a much bigger population, much more effective army. So that's a big worry for Saudi Arabia, is that they could be attacked by Iran, and they would not fare very well in a war. Sorry. Yeah, with Iran. Yeah, that's been a big concern as well. The possibility of nuclear weapons being involved. Anything else from there?
It seemed like concerned. I looked it up, so I couldn't remember yet. You're like at least claimed that we were pulling out of Iraq. That's found to be the shortest.
Yeah.
And they seem really concerned with things getting back up in the area.
Yeah. Yeah, they seem to be, this military document seems to be much more concerned about what could happen in Iraq, more so than what could happen in Syria. Which makes sense. Iraq is the bigger prize for the United States. Iraq has a much bigger population. Iraq has a lot more oil than Syria does. Syria is just not as geopolitically important as Iraq is.
What was I was not smart enough back then to know what the hell was going on. What was the situation in Iraq around that time?
By the time of 2011, things had pretty much calmed down. You had a civil war that the U.S. helped to cause in Iraq after the invasion, because what the U.S. did was they overthrew a Sunni government headed by Saddam Hussein, and the Shia initially were more friendly to the United States because they viewed them as the United States could come in and they could dislodge the Sunni government, and then the Shia would have a chance to gain more power in the country. And that is kind of what happened, and that's why the Sunni populations were the ones that rebelled much more fearsomely with like Al Qaeda and things like that. Again, being a Sunni group, but by 2011, things had really calmed down a lot. The Civil War was over. Things weren't good in the country, but the violence had seriously died down. So yeah, it's not until about 2014 that you have really bad violence in Iraq again. That's because of the Islamic State. That's because of ISIS.
They seem both really concerned that Al Qaeda's actions are going to kick things back up, but also supporting them against the Syrian government.
Yeah, right. Like they want to contain this thing to Syria, it seems. They don't want it. They don't want this Sunni rebellion spreading to Iraq and causing another civil war in the country. Yeah, the second to last page, it talks about the effects on Iraq. In point C, it says, if the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want, in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic depth of the Shia expansion. So there's this great quote from a Seymour Hersh article from 2007, where he talks about this new strategy that the Bush administration is developing with the Saudis. And he's talking about the Saudi government. They're meeting with them, and these Saudi government officials tell the U.S. officials, who then tell Seymour Hersh, they say that we invented this movement of Salafis and like Al Qaeda fighters. They said we essentially invented this movement and we can control it. It's not that we don't want these Salafis to throw bombs, it's who they throw them at. We want them to throw them at Muqtada al-Sadr, who is the leader of the Shia militant group in Iraq, Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria, if they continue to work with Hezbollah and Iran. So that's 2007. Where they basically say, like, we are going to work with the Saudis to contain this, what we see as a Shia revival or a Shia expansion. That's what they mean when they say, like, the Shia expansion is because the Iraqi Shia are getting more powerful in Iraq, and Iran is also getting more powerful and influential in Iraq as well. Because Iran gets a lot more influence in Iraq once the Saddam government is overthrown, because they put a lot of money into trying to influence things.
So the U.S. is primary interest here in isolating Syria from Iraq.
Yeah. So like, there used to be, you had Iran on one side and Syria on the other, and then between them used to be Iraq, which was dominated by Saddam Hussein, a Sunni regime. America gets rid of the Saddam Sunni regime, and Iran invests a lot of money. Iran is a big winner as a result of the Iraq War. It becomes a lot more influential in Iraq and in the region. So then you have Iran extending its influence into Iraq, and you kind of have this bridge now between Iran and Syria through Iraq as a result of this expansion. So that's what they mean by like is you're now getting this bridge between Iran and Syria through Iraq. Yeah, that they and especially the Saudis are concerned about. It's like, it's funny when they say that we are concerned. You can kind of think of it as them as saying the Saudis are concerned about these things, and therefore we are concerned. Okay. Yeah, and then under point D on the last little bit of that page, it says, this creates the ideal atmosphere for al-Qaeda to return to its old pockets in Mosul and Ramadi, and will provide new momentum under the presumption of unifying the jihad among Sunni, Iraqi, and Syrians, and the rest of the Sunnis in the Arab world against what it considers the enemy, the dissenters, which is the Shia populations in the area. ISA could also declare an Islamic State through its union with other terrorist organizations in Iraq and Syria. So a reason why that's important is that is exactly what happens. This declared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, straddling eastern Syria and western Iraq. That is exactly what happens. By 2014, what becomes known as ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, which grows out of al-Qaeda in Iraq, they are able to take control of most of the Sunni Arab opposition groups in the eastern part of Syria, and then they blast back across the border into Iraq, and they take Mosul, one of Iraq's biggest cities, and they declare a caliphate. And that continues on until they're defeated by about 2018. They're largely defeated. Doesn't last very long, but you do get what they describe here in this report does occur. So this is a map of Syria from 2016, the beginning of 2016. And what you can see is, again, like it's described in the report, these red areas are where the Syrian government is based. You can see they don't have much territory, but this area near the coast of the Mediterranean, near Lebanon, is where most of the population lives. So even though the Syrian government doesn't control most of the territory of Syria by this point, it does still control most of the population. In the eastern part of Syria, you can see that big black blob there. That is the Islamic State. That's ISIS. In the north, you can see that's where the Kurdish populations are. That's the Syrian Rojavan People's Protection Units. They're largely socialist and communist based, like in their ideology. They're based in the Kurdish ethnicity, but ideologically they're much more secular. They're more egalitarian, socialistic, even communistic. But they're up in the Kurdish regions. And then you have all these pockets of the green and also the purple. The green is the Free Syrian Army, or what becomes branded as the Free Syrian Army, which is the official opposition that the US supports. And then kind of mixed in with the Free Syrian Army, you have al-Qaeda, known as the al-Nusra Front, which is the al-Qaeda branch in Syria. I think I'll leave it there because it's super. All the different militias and things are complicated, so I'll get into it. Okay. So that's the general overview of the Syrian Civil War. But what's happening with what I'm specifically looking at in my dissertation is this. At the same time that you had the US and its allies supporting armed rebels, there was a media and propaganda war going on at the same time. And the US and its allies, especially the UK, spent about $1 billion to set up this media and soft power network to help support armed rebels and the project of dislodging, of overthrowing the Syrian government. This map here I have is from an internal document that I got access to of one of these contractors that was working on this propaganda and soft power project. And on here, it lists, is from 2015. They have a list of, they're doing workshops, they're training individuals, they have beneficiary organizations that they're funding and helping to organize. They are distributing pieces of equipment, which means like cameras, video recorders, internet devices, so you can access like satellites and things like that. And they're also distributing like wages to people, $2.4 million in stipends. The red dots that you see on the map are the Free Syrian Police that they set up. So they set up a police force for these opposition groups that are taking control of Syrian territory. They're also training media people and people who provide basic services. They're helping set up and fund like sanitation services and municipal councils, like local governments. Basic civil services for these populations that are under rebel control. Yes, that. And at the same time, what they're supporting, I just want to stress the violence behind this and like what kind of ideological groups they're supporting in this war. So one of the groups that is being supported with public relations work, with media support, with giving them money to help run local governments, is Jaish al-Islam. These photos that you see here are of them using Alawite civilians as human shields. They're putting them in these kind of medieval-looking cages and putting them on the bed of a truck and driving them around these areas to try to stop the Syrian government from bombing these areas. And here, this is another document that was leaked online that I got access to. I'll just read a little bit of it. This is from one of the contractors that they have that the US and UK are funding. This is what they say. In order to facilitate credible access, maximize flexibility, and ensure project resonance, Albany Associates, that's the name of the contractor, intends to hire a Syrian staff member. And they say he has a proven track record of managing relationships with armed groups. And then the next sentence they say, this moderate MAO means moderate armed opposition, the official term they gave to the groups that they were supporting. This Mao engagement leader has deep credibility with key groups, including, I won't name all these because there's too many different militias. I just want to point out, they list Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam on this. Just those, I just want to highlight those two organizations because those are important for the war. So they say we have an engagement leader who is going to engage with Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam. And then they say the engagement leader will provide a conduit for consortium support in developing communication skills and strategy appropriate for each group. So that's what they called themselves, the consortium, is this group of contractors that were working on this project. They call themselves the consortium. They're developing the communication skills and strategies for each group. That is, for Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam. With technical backstopping from Albany and these other contractors. But last thing I want to read is this highlighted section. It says, a distinct advantage of an Albany-based engagement leader to engage with the moderate armed opposition is the inherent flexibility. And this is the last key one. As armed groups change allegiances, wax and wane, having this knowledgeable point of contact will protect the project from the risk of being wed to a particular institutional formula comprised of groups who may or may not be at any given time viable, effective, respected in the community, or in fact moderate. So this is supposed to be supporting the moderate armed opposition. We are only going to support the moderates. We're only going to support the liberals, the people who are fighting for freedom and democracy, who are non-sectarian, who are trying to create something more akin to like a Western-style country. And they say this is one of the most like candid documents that you can read in this linked group of documents that I worked with. They say the people that we're working with, they may or may not actually be moderate. And we are going to try to make it so that we de-risk working with them. So we're going to continue to work with them, but we're going to insulate ourselves so that they don't like screw things up for us or embarrass us, and we can shift gears if we need to. Here, I also want to point out a few other things. Some key militias that were involved in the Syrian Civil War. You have the Nur al-Din al-Zenki movement. You also have Ahrar al-Sham, which I believe means the free men of the Levant, and Jabhat al-Nusra. Those are the three big ones, for this story at least. Nusra is al-Qaeda. They're the al-Qaeda branch in Syria. Ahrar al-Sham is the Muslim Brotherhood branch in Syria, or they at least derive from the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, which was mentioned in that report. And al-Zenki is a more independent Salafi organization, but it's still Sunni Arab Salafi in ideology. Al-Zenki was part of the official CIA-vetted moderate armed opposition. We actually gave al-Zenki weapons and anti-tank missiles to help fight their war. They were supposed to be part of the official moderate armed opposition that we were openly and proudly supporting in that war. Ahrar al-Sham, we did not provide them with direct weapons. We didn't directly send them missiles or guns or anything like that, but we did do public relations and media support for them. We didn't support them with lethal force, but we supported them in other ways. And Jabhat al-Nusra is an interesting one because we didn't support them either in directly with guns or with like media and society support. We indirectly opposed them. This was something that came up in the documents several times. They kept using this term indirect. We're going to indirectly counter al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda branch in Syria. And they're basically saying that because they don't want to alienate the al-Qaeda branch, and they don't want to alienate the people that support the al-Qaeda branch in Syria. So we're not going to directly support them, but we're not going to directly oppose them either. And they kind of have this very ambiguous relationship with the al-Qaeda branch in Syria. And I guess I should say, like, whatever America's and its allies' intentions were, al-Qaeda becomes the group that is most effective at fighting the Syrian government. They are the Sunni Arab group that is the most effective at fighting the Syrian government until ISIS comes along. And most of the weapons that the US and its allies send over to Syria, through one way or another, they eventually end up in the hands of al-Nusra and ISIS, because they're the ones who generally are the most effective fighters. So despite, again, with this ambiguous relationship, while the US might not be directly giving weapons to Ahrar al-Sham, or they might not be directly supporting Jabhat al-Nusra, they are supporting al-Zanki, which was allied with both of them for several years throughout this war. Sometimes they fought with each other, sometimes they fought against each other. Their allegiances would change, and sometimes they'd be enemies, sometimes allies. So here's a little something that what they were doing in this war is I've been trying to figure out ways I can explain it easily. Best thing I can say to try to explain what was going on here was, imagine if you had rebels take over this part of Ohio, or say like between Bowling Green and like Detroit, Michigan, you have rebels take over that territory and they hold on to it for several years. Now imagine that China, working with the Canadians, is bringing rebels outside of the United States, bringing them into Canada, giving them guns, training them how to use those guns, weapons, and then sending them back into the United States to help so they can fight against the US government. And at the same time they're doing that, they're also sending other people out of the country into Canada, and they're teaching them how to use cameras and how to write a news story, how to talk to the media, how to design websites, how to create local governments. So they're training both people who are like armed with guns and going back into the United States, and they're also training people and equipping people with like cameras and like the ability to use media and narrative as weapons of war. And also helping to establish that, all paid for and supplied by like the Chinese or the Russians, let's say, some sort of foreign power. So here's something this is just a little example from a project the French were involved in. They had this thing called the Syrian Media Incubator, which its goal was to train journalists to produce high-quality news with a view to the transition to democracy. So here's what the French government did. They trained and equipped one guy, this guy named Hassan Katan, and he became a professional journalist. And then Hassan Katan founded his own media outlet, the Aleppo Media Center, which is a rebel media center outlet. And the French government funded that media outlet, and then that media outlet went on to train other journalists, like Khalid here. So they're kind of starting the process, and they're trying to get other people to train. They train one person, and then that person goes back into Syria and trains more people on how to do this media work. And this is all to help support these armed militias, to provide plausible narratives for American, Western, and also Syrian audiences. A lot of this stuff was in Arabic media, to convince them that this is a effective, viable, efficient, moderate, democratic, progressive movement that is going to replace Assad. This is to try to convince people to support these groups, to cover up the extremism, to cover up the sectarianism and the violence that they're inflicting, and to try to get people to support this armed rebellion. Last couple things I want to just point to is with US aid specifically, one of the institutions I looked at in my dissertation, one of their big things that they fund is a group called the White Helmets, which combines a lot of this civil society governance and media work that they were doing in Syria. They give the White Helmets, I think, about $150 million by 2020. And it's sold as this grassroots humanitarian organization of local Syrians who wanted to get involved in protecting their communities from bombings and from violence of the war. Here, I'll just play this trailer from the 2016 Netflix documentary, which won an Oscar. This is how the White Helmets are advertised.
ايوه
Missile attacks on hospitals and schools in rebel-held areas that left up to 50 civilians dead.
كدفاع مدني صار القبعة البيضاء اللي أول الناس بيكونوا موجودين حالة القصف. يعني سوريا كل العالم عم بتابع أخباره وما حدا يلاقوا له حل. لأن شعارنا أولاً وأخيراً نحن كدفاع مدني فمن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعاً.
Yeah. Gracious. Now I get what you mean.
It's a little much, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this whole thing since the war in Gaza started, because I think there are a lot of parallels here between like the accusations about like human shields, talk about beheadings. There's some prominent, beheadings in the Syrian story that are much more real than the accusations that we've been given with the Gaza war. And also the bombings, the bombings of civilian areas. If you've been following the war in Gaza at all, that's been a big thing, right? Of like the Israelis destroying all the civilian infrastructure, bombing hospitals, bombing schools, bakeries, things like that. And this was all very much weaponized in Syria, but in a kind of weird reverse way. Like the United States and its allies spent $150 million to create the White Helmets and to weaponize atrocity stories and propaganda in the Syrian conflict. Whereas in a place like Gaza, you don't have something like that, right? You don't have China or another country spending $150 million to create this humanitarian group that they do actually seem to rescue some people, but they're also creating propaganda while they do it. They're trained to wield cameras just as much as they are trained to like dig people out of rubble. So because it's geopolitically useful for the US to do stuff like that in Syria, they do it. They spend $150 million to do it. It's not geopolitically useful for them to do it in Gaza and to make a big deal out of that. The bombings that are going on there, so they don't do it, and no one else is doing anything similar. But as a quick rundown, despite it trying to portray it as a grassroots opposition movement, humanitarian, just trying to keep people alive, the White Helmets are a product of this covert billion-dollar propaganda and civil society scheme. It's created by that one of those maps I showed you earlier. It's created by this contractor called ARC, and ARC creates the White Helmets. One of their employees, James the Measurer, who was a UK military intelligence officer during the 1990s, he's the one who establishes the White Helmets. He founds them. He's an employee of ARC. He handles their training. He creates the charity organization that funnels money to the White Helmets and provides training to them. So that is, the White Helmets are a creation of the British state, essentially. There's a lot of interesting things with James LeMessurier's story, but I won't get into that because I don't have time. And to help create that documentary that you just saw, or you saw the trailer for, a big help for that was this organization called the Syria Campaign, which I found out in these leaked documents worked directly with ARC, covertly. And the Syria Campaign, which again styles itself as this humanitarian organization, it's a grassroots civil society, it's just concerned citizens who are trying to, help people in Syria. It was started by a expatriate of Syria who he left Syria at an early age. He grew up and was educated in the UK. He's the billionaire CEO of a British oil company called Petrofac. Ayman Asfari is his name. That's him on the right next to John Kerry in the red tie. Secretary of State John Kerry. And he had his own foundation called the Asfari Foundation, and through that foundation, he created the Syria Campaign, and he helped fund a lot of other civil society organizations in Syria supporting the opposition. So you got, intelligence agencies, intelligence interests, oil lobby, oil interests. He was also a big campaign donor to the Conservative Party in the UK. You got a lot of elite interests here. And something that's really interesting that this consortium is trying to do is they're creating this propaganda, and they're trying to create this false narrative about this moderate rebellion for freedom and democracy that's going on in Syria that we need to support. But they're also, all this civil society and governance stuff they're trying to do, they are trying to make that false narrative closer to reality. They're trying to get these militias to rebrand is a big thing. In fact, al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda branch in Syria, tries to rebrand twice to try to get Western support. But they try to help rebrand all of these militias to make them more palatable to Western audiences. This is, again, from these leaked documents. This is from ARC. And they say, in this figure, it says PHASMA, which is a media outlet that ARC created. Again, helping to create propaganda outlets. PHASMA has already carried out limited rebranding for the Free Syrian Army, that's what the FSA is, that was well received. And here you can see they have stickers for the Free Syrian Army, the softening the Free Syrian Army image. Stickers before November 2012. You have this man, dressed in all black with a balaclava on, at least the term for that, holding an AK, and pointing it and looking very aggressive in that before sticker. And then you have an after sticker where you have another Syrian man. This time he's in military fatigues. He doesn't have a mask. He is not holding a weapon. You can't even see his hands. But he looks like an official soldier wearing an official uniform. So that's an example of the kind of rebranding they were trying to do to create this narrative of a moderate democratic opposition. I won't read all of these because these are long, but this on the left here was a project schematic that they had in their documents where they tried to show how all of these civil society and governance programs are also ways to create propaganda. So they had coordinated campaigns on the bottom part here, and they had different campaigns and events for different months. So September, they had a back to school campaign. In October, they had a thing they called My Priorities, talking about like issues that are most pressing to the local population. And then in November, they have a program around winterization, helping people prepare for winter. And through their media outlets like Mobile, Syria, Graph, RFS, SMO, these are all media outlets that they set up. Through these media outlets, they could then make these programs into news stories. You know, there's a news story about like some civil society program that they had going on. They would weaponize like women's organizations a lot. You know, they would say like, look at all the women that we have working for us who are empowering local women in this community. They would turn that into pro-rebel propaganda. This little bit on the top right, I just want to read one sentence here. It says, through its DASMA products, ARC's approach is a radical departure to previous multi-million-dollar programming in Iraq and Afghanistan, in that it has raised and trained local national staff as a core element of the capability. This has resulted in a resonance of product not seen in products produced and disseminated by non-native staff. So it's largely white Europeans who are creating these things and funding them and arming them, but they're trying to get Syrians to come in and be the faces of these organizations. So you're getting what can be sold as a more authentic narrative about what's going on, both to Western audiences and also to Syrian audiences as well. Again, a lot of this stuff is in Arabic, and they're targeting Arabic speakers specifically. So that's a little innovation that they make in this campaign, is that they don't just have a bunch of like white Europeans running all this stuff. They are actually trying to get locals to head a lot of this stuff as well. And I just wanted to point out this one at the bottom right to show some more of the scope of media outlets that they were working with and setting up. So this is from another government contractor, and they're bragging about all of these different media outlets that they have partnerships with. So they say media partnerships, a network of networks. We have strong relationships with, and then they list all these different like radio stations and TV stations, things like that. Again, mostly in Arabic or Arabic media. So they are deeply involved in organizing not just the military moves that are going on, like they're trying to organize these militias militarily to help them to fight against the Syrian government. They're also trying to organize them ideologically and trying to organize them through in a narrative sense as well, to both help them fight the Syrian government and also to justify intervention. Because the U.S. is continuously, and especially some of the bigger hawks in the American government, are looking for excuses that they can find to intervene more heavily in the country, in the conflict. So like a lot of, and that's what these organizations are trying to do. They're trying to find as much atrocity propaganda as they can, because they know that's going to be their best shot at convincing a foreign power, namely the United States, to come in and intervene on their behalf. So yeah, I'll end it there so I'm not going too far over time. But that's my general like contribution for this chapter. I think what I'm trying to do is like, Syria is a really good example of this combination of democracy promotion and deep politics. So you have what is supposed to be overt. It's supposed to be democratic. It's supposed to be, proud. We're just helping support democracy. Democracy is supposed to be publicly accountable. It's supposed to be publicly known. You have that combined with all this covert operations, all these very shady, dirty schemes that they have going on in Syria that are hidden from public view, that are purposefully covert and obfuscated to try to cover up what they're doing, keep people in the dark about what they're doing, and to manipulate people into supporting a narrative that even by some of their own admissions is not necessarily true. And these supposed democracy promotion institutions are very heavily implicated in those shady, covert, anti-democratic programs. So like obviously these Al-Qaeda groups and these Muslim Brotherhood groups, they're openly anti-democratic. They do not value democracy. They do not want a democratic system, and yet they are the ones who are being supported by these supposed democracy promotion organizations, right? They are supporting the militant, violent, sectarian, fundamentalist, reactionary, fascistic, anti-democratic opposition in government or in the country. So there's a lot more that I could talk about, but I don't want to go on forever. Is there any questions anyone has?
You told me the story several times. So.
Yeah. No, I know. And thank you for coming to all these, Dylan. I know you already had to deal with me talking about my research and dissertation a lot, but I really appreciate you still coming to these. Yeah. Okay. I can end it there then.